The night was darker than ever when I finally managed to gather all the courage left in my shattered heart. Madison was sleeping soundly in my arms, her dark curls stuck to her sweaty little face from the suffocating heat of our tiny room. Each step I took on the worn floorboards seemed to echo like a cry for help in my terrified ears. My heart was beating so wildly that I feared waking my daughter or worse, alerting Hank that I was trying to escape for the fourth time into years. 3 months had passed since my last failed attempt. 3 long months of even more brutal beatings, of humiliations that tore at my soul like sharp claws, of endless nights when he came home drunk and turned our house into a living hell. The purple and yellow bruises on my arms had finally disappeared, but the invisible scars on my heart continued to bleed, drop by drop, day after day. This time would be different. This time I had a plan that seemed perfect. Maria, my only true friend in that miserable neighborhood, had sworn on her mother's grave that she would help us. She knew every dark alley, every secret shortcut through the back of Southside, far from the ever-vigilant eyes of the neighbors who would turn us in for a few dirty bucks. Her house was on the other side of town, hidden in the shadows of old buildings, and there I could take refuge with Madison until I had enough money to leave for good. Maybe to Los Angeles, where my older sister lived with her merchant husband. Or who knows, maybe even to Canada, where they said women like me could start their lives over without fear. I took a deep breath, feeling the hot, heavy air enter my lungs like desert sand. Madison stirred slightly in my arms, murmuring something unintelligible in her innocent dreams. She had no idea what was happening, of the danger we were in, of the reason her mother was shaking like a leaf in the wind. To her, I was still the strong, courageous mom who sang lullabies every night. If only she knew that inside I was completely broken. I opened the front door with the care of someone disarming a bomb. The creak of the old hinges made my blood run cold. I stopped for a long moment, listening intently for any sound that might come from the room where Hank slept the heavy sleep of the drunk. Nothing. Only the distant sound of the night wind whistling through the cracks of the poorly closed windows. I walked barefoot through the narrow, dusty streets, every shadow transforming into a threat, every noise making me jump in fright. Madison felt heavier and heavier in my tired arms, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't rest for even a second. Freedom was there, so close that I could almost touch it with my fingertips. In a few minutes, we would be at Maria's house, safe, free, ready to start a new life away from the nightmare our existence had become. That's when I saw the silhouettes moving in the darkness ahead of me. 3 men emerged from the shadows like evil ghosts, completely blocking my path. My blood froze in my veins when I recognized Seth, Hank's younger brother, with his cruel smile and eyes as cold as ice. Next to him were 2 other men I didn't know, but who carried that dangerous aura of someone who wouldn't hesitate to use violence.
Just to make sure you keep getting our stories, subscribe to the channel, give this one a like too, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from.
Did you really think you could get away so easily, Annie? Seth took a step forward, his voice cutting through the night like a sharp razor. My brother was right. You really are a treacherous snake who doesn't know her place. My heart plummeted into my chest as the terrible truth hit me like a punch to the stomach. Maria, my dear, trusted Maria had sold me out like a piece of merchandise. She knew our plan from the beginning, knew exactly when I would try to escape, knew which route I would take. How much money had she traded for our friendship? For how many coins had she sold my trust and my daughter's safety? Please, I whispered, holding Madison even tighter against my chest. She's just a child. Do whatever you want with me, but leave my daughter alone. Seth laughed, a harsh, inhuman sound. Both of you are coming with us. Hank has some very special plans for you. They dragged me through the deserted streets, completely ignoring my desperate protests and pleas for mercy. Madison woke up during the journey, her confused little eyes searching for mine in the dark, not understanding why strange men were taking us away. I tried to comfort her with soft words, but my voice was broken by fear and the pain of the betrayal I had just suffered. When we got home, Hank was waiting for us in the main living room, smoking a cheap cigarette and drinking straight from a bottle of whiskey. His red, bloodshot eyes looked at me with such intense hatred that I felt as if knives were being plunged into my skin. He got up slowly, savoring every second of my terror, every tear that rolled down my face. You thought you could make a fool of me, didn't you? He walked towards me with measured steps, like a predator approaching its wounded prey. You thought I wouldn't find out about your pathetic plans? Before I could answer, His hand came down on my face with brutal force. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth, and stars danced before my eyes for a few seconds. Madison started crying, holding her little arms out to me, but Seth held her firmly. "Now you're going to learn the price of disobedience," Hank growled, his fingers closing around my neck. "And you're going to learn the hard way." That's when he told me about his diabolical plans. For months he had been racking up gambling debts, losing money he didn't have on stupid bets and endless drinking binges. Now the creditors were knocking on our door, threatening to break his bones if he didn't pay everything by the end of the week. And he had found a solution that would kill two birds with one stone. He would sell me and Madison to a mysterious buyer who was willing to pay a generous amount for quality goods. "You always wanted your freedom," he said with a sadistic smile. "Well, now you're going to get it. You'll be free to serve another master, in another place, far away from me." His words hit me like physical blows. I knew that men like Hank were capable of many cruelties, but I never imagined he would go so far as to sell us as slaves. And what would become of Madison? What kind of horrible future awaited her in the hands of a stranger who bought people as if they were animals? I spent the next night locked in a small storage shed in the back of the house, with Madison clinging to my chest, both of us trembling with cold and fear. My hands were tied with rough ropes that cut into my skin with every movement, and my lips were dry and cracked from thirst. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the despair that consumed my soul like a wildfire. The next day, as the sun was barely beginning to rise on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, I heard footsteps approaching the shed. It was time. The moment I had dreaded had finally arrived. They were coming to get us, to take us to meet our fate, whatever that meant. Seth opened the door and dragged us out without any gentleness. Hank was waiting in the courtyard, dressed in his best clothes as if he were going to a celebration. Next to him was a man I had never seen before, tall, thin, with small, cruel eyes that evaluated me as if I were a piece of cattle at a market. "Is this her?" the stranger asked, his voice as harsh as sandpaper. "Yes, this is Annie. And the little girl is Madison, her daughter," Hank said in a disgusting commercial tone. "Both are strong, healthy. The woman knows how to cook, clean, take care of children. The girl is young, can be molded however you want." I felt like I was going to throw up hearing my own husband describing us as merchandise at a fair. I held Madison even tighter against my chest, whispering silent prayers that some miracle would save us from that nightmare. The man approached us, his hands touching my face and arms as if he were examining a farm animal. His fingers were cold and calloused, and his breath smelled of tobacco and something rotten that made my stomach turn. Madison started crying softly, hiding her little face in my neck. "They'll do," he said finally, "but the price needs to be discussed with my boss. He'll be here in a few hours." Then we were locked in the shed again, this time under the guard of two armed men who never took their eyes off us for a second. The hours dragged on like entire years. Madison dozed in my arms, exhausted by stress and fear, while I remained vigilant, my mind working frantically in search of a way out, some chance to escape before it was too late. When the sun was high in the sky, I heard the sound of cars approaching, male voices talking in low tones, heavy footsteps walking through the courtyard. My heart pounded when I realized that the final moment was approaching. In a matter of minutes, I would know who our new owner would be, what our destiny would be, whether I would ever see the light of day again as a free woman. The shed door opened once more, and this time it was Hank accompanied by a man completely different from the previous one. This one was tall and imposing, wearing fine clothes that screamed wealth and power. His eyes were dark and penetrating, but there was something in them that I couldn't identify. It wasn't cruelty like in the others. It was something different, something that made my heart skip a beat for reasons I couldn't comprehend. When our eyes met, something strange happened. He stopped abruptly, as if he had seen a ghost. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I had the impression that he was struggling to breathe. There was recognition there, as if he knew me from somewhere, but I was absolutely certain I had never seen him in my life. "Is this her?" he asked, his voice deep and controlled, but loaded with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "Yes, sir. This is Annie and her daughter Madison." As agreed, Hank said with a reverence he had never shown to anyone. The man approached slowly, his steps measured and careful. When he got close to us, he knelt to be at eye level with me. There was something familiar about his face, something that stirred a buried memory in the back of my mind, but I couldn't identify what. "Do you remember the fire at the downtown market 3 years ago?" he asked softly. The question hit me like a bolt of lightning. The fire. Of course I remembered. It had been one of the most terrifying days of my life. I was at the market with Madison, who was only 2 at the time, when a fire started in one of the fabric stalls. The fire spread quickly, and within minutes the entire market was in flames. In the middle of the panic and confusion, I heard desperate screams coming from one of the burning stores. It was a little girl, not much older than Madison, trapped under some wood that had fallen from the ceiling. Without a second thought, I handed my daughter to a strange woman and ran towards the fire. I managed to get the girl out from under the rubble and carry her out of the burning building seconds before everything collapsed. Then, in the midst of the chaos, I lost sight of her and never knew what had happened to her. "The girl," I whispered, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place in my mind. "You're the girl's father," he nodded, his eyes shining with intense emotion. "Layla, my daughter Layla. You saved her life that day, and since then I swore I would find you one day to repay that gesture." Tears began to roll down my face, and for the first time since this all started, I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, fate had other plans for us. He turned to Hank with an expression that changed completely. Where before there was gentleness, now there was a cutting coldness that made even my husband recoil a few steps. "I accept the deal," he said, his voice cutting the air like a sharp blade. "But the conditions change now." From that moment on, everything happened very quickly. Money changed hands, papers were signed, and suddenly I no longer belonged to Hank. I belonged to a man named Rashid Al-Mansuri, who I overheard in whispered conversations was a billionaire sheikh with properties all over the Middle East. As the details of the transaction were being finalized, Rashid approached me again, this time with a much softer expression in his dark eyes. "My name is Rashid," he said softly, so that only I could hear. "And I promise that from now on, you and your daughter will be safe." I couldn't answer. The words were stuck in my throat, mixed with tears of relief, fear, and confusion. Could I trust him? Was this just a trade of one nightmare for another? Or was it possible that, after so much suffering, I had finally found someone who would treat us with dignity? Within an hour, Madison and I were sitting in the back seat of a luxurious car, leaving behind the only life we had ever known. Through the tinted window, I saw Hank for the last time, holding the envelope of cash he had received for selling us. He didn't even look in our direction as the car drove away, taking us towards a completely unknown future. The journey was long and silent. Rashid was sitting in the front, next to the driver, occasionally looking at us in the rearview mirror. His eyes met mine several times during the journey, and with each look I felt as if he was trying to convey some message that I still couldn't decipher. Madison slept most of the time, her little head resting on my shoulder, completely oblivious to the magnitude of the changes that were happening in our lives. I envied her innocence, her ability to find peace even in the midst of all that uncertainty. As we moved away from the city, the scenery gradually changed. The crowded buildings and narrow streets gave way to wide, clean roads. The old, noisy cars were replaced by luxurious vehicles that seemed to float on the asphalt. It was as if we were leaving a world of poverty and desolation to enter a kingdom of wealth and opulence. After hours on the road, we finally arrived at our destination. When the gates opened, revealing what was beyond them, I couldn't contain a gasp of surprise. Before me stretched a palace that seemed to have come straight out of the pages of a fairy tale. Elegant towers rose towards the starry sky, their golden domes shining under the light of the full moon. Perfectly manicured gardens stretched everywhere, with crystal-clear fountains and imposing palm trees creating an oasis of beauty in the middle of the desert. The air was perfumed with jasmine and roses, a fragrance so different from the odors of poverty and despair that I had left behind. "This is my home," Rashid said softly, helping us out of the car. "And from today, it is also your home." A crowd of employees was waiting for us at the main entrance, all dressed in impeccable uniforms and welcoming smiles. An older woman, with graying hair and kind eyes, stepped forward towards us. "This is Fatima," Rashid explained. "She is the head of the household and will take care of everything you need." Fatima bowed respectfully before us, which completely disconcerted me. Why was a clearly respectable woman bowing before someone like me, a former slave who had just been bought as merchandise? "Welcome, Saida Annie," she said with a warm voice. "And you too, little Madison. We have prepared a special room for you." Saida. Lady. No one had ever addressed me with such respect. For years with Hank, I had been just woman or worse. To the neighbors, I was invisible. To Maria, I had apparently just been a source of extra income. But here, in this magnificent palace, I was being treated as if I were someone important. We followed Fatima through wide corridors decorated with Persian rugs and works of art that seemed to be worth more than everything I had ever owned in my entire life. The walls were adorned with intricate mosaics that told ancient stories, and crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like captured constellations. The room that was assigned to us was larger than the entire house where I had lived with Hank. A huge bed dominated the center of the space, covered with silk sheets and surrounded by flowing curtains that danced gently in the night breeze. There was also a sitting area with comfortable armchairs, a marble table, and a private balcony that offered a stunning view of the illuminated gardens. "The bathroom is over there," Fatima said, pointing to an ornate door. "And there are clean clothes in the closet. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call me." There's a bell next to the bed. When we were finally alone, Madison and I just stood in the middle of the room, trying to process everything that had happened. In less than 24 hours, our lives had been turned completely upside down. From a miserable existence in a dirty shack, we had been transported to a palace worthy of royalty. But why? What was the price of this apparent generosity? No one did something like this without expecting something in return. Rashid had said I saved his daughter, but that was 3 years ago. Why had he waited so long? And more importantly, what did he expect from me now? Madison was fascinated by everything around her. She ran from one corner to the other of the room, touching the soft curtains, admiring the shining ornaments, jumping on the gigantic bed as if it were a trampoline. To her, this was an exciting adventure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was waiting for the other half of the story, the dark part that had not yet been revealed. We bathed that night in a marble tub bigger than any swimming pool I had ever seen. The water was perfumed with aromatic oils, and there were soaps and shampoos from brands I didn't even know existed. Madison played in the water for a long time, laughing and making bubbles, happier than I had seen her in months. Afterwards, we put on clean, soft clothes that had been left for us. They were simple pieces, but made of fine fabrics that caressed the skin like a gentle breeze. When I looked at myself in the large mirror on the wall, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Without the marks of brutality, without the dirt of poverty, without the constant fear stamped on my face, I looked like a completely different person. It was very late when a soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Rashid, now dressed in more casual but still elegant clothes. He asked for permission to enter, and when I agreed, walked to the balcony. "How are you both feeling?" he asked, his voice genuinely concerned. "Confused," I replied honestly. "Grateful but confused." He smiled, and for the first time I noticed how his eyes lit up when he did that. "I imagine so. This must all be very difficult to process." Madison had fallen asleep in the huge bed, nestled among soft pillows like a fairy tale princess. I watched my daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in months, without the nightmares that used to torment her when we still lived with Hank. "Why did you do this?" I finally asked, gathering the courage to ask the question that was consuming me inside. "Why did you buy me? What do you want in return?" Rashid was silent for a long moment, looking at the horizon where the city lights flickered like earthly stars. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with a deep emotion that made me shiver. 3 years ago, you risked your life to save my daughter. You didn't know me. You didn't know who I was. You didn't expect anything in return. You did it simply because it was the right thing to do." He turned to face me directly. "Since that day, I swore I would find you and repay your kindness. When I found out you were being sold, I couldn't allow you to fall into the hands of someone who could hurt you. So I'm free." I asked, barely daring to believe the words coming out of my own mouth. "You are free," he confirmed, and there was an absolute certainty in his voice. But my heart stopped. There was always a but. There was always a condition, a price to be paid, a trap hidden in the sweet words. "But what?" I whispered, preparing for the worst. "But I would like to ask you and Madison to stay here until the threat your ex-husband poses is completely gone. He might try to get you back. He might cause trouble. Here you will be safe, protected. When everything calms down, if you still want to leave, I will help you start a new life wherever you choose." I looked at him, trying to find signs of lying or manipulation in his eyes. But all I saw was sincerity and a genuine concern for our safety. It was hard to believe that after so much suffering, I had finally found someone who cared about us without wanting anything in return. And what if I decide to stay? I asked, surprising myself with my own audacity. What if I find that this place has become our home? A slow, warm smile spread across Rashid's face, completely transforming his serious features. Then I would be happier than you can imagine. That night, for the first time in years, I fell asleep without fear of what tomorrow might bring. Madison was safe in my arms, breathing softly, and through the open window I could hear the tranquil sound of the garden fountains. Maybe, just maybe, our long journey through the darkness was finally coming to an end. The following days passed like a hazy dream. I woke up every morning expecting to find out that it was all just a cruel illusion, but the reality of our new life continued to unfold before our eyes like a flower slowly blooming in the sun. Fatima became our guide in this new and disconcerting world. She showed us every corner of the palace, explaining the routines of the house, introducing us to the other employees. Everyone treated us with a respectful courtesy that still left me perplexed. It was as if I had woken up in a parallel universe where women like me were treated as human beings worthy of consideration. Madison adapted to our new reality with the natural ease of children. In a few days, she was already running through the corridors as if she had been born there, playing with the palace cats, fascinated by the vibrant colors of the fish in the decorative tanks. Her laughter echoed through the rooms, a sound I hadn't heard for so long that I had almost forgotten how comforting it was. Rashid appeared occasionally during the day, always polite, always respectful, but maintaining a careful distance that I appreciated. He never tried to impose himself or make demands. He just checked if we were comfortable, if we needed anything, if we were adapting well. There was a genuine kindness in his actions that contrasted drastically with everything I had known before. It was on the 5th morning that I met Layla. I was in the garden with Madison, watching her play with the colorful butterflies that danced among the flowers, when I heard footsteps behind us. I turned and saw Rashid approaching, accompanied by a girl of about 5. She was beautiful, with dark curly hair and large eyes that were exact copies of her father's. But there was a deep sadness in those childlike eyes that broke my heart. Layla, Rashid said softly, "This is Annie, the woman I told you about, the woman who saved your life in the fire." The girl looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. For a moment, I was speechless, seeing before me the child I had rescued from the flames 3 years ago. She had grown, obviously, but I could still recognize the delicate features, the same determined expression she had when I found her trapped under the rubble. "Hi, Layla," I finally said, kneeling to be at her eye level. "Do you remember me?" She shook her head no, but continued to study me with that childlike intensity that seemed to pierce my soul. "That's okay," I continued gently. "You were very small, but I remember you. You were very brave that day." Madison, always sociable, ran up to us with a flower in her hand, offering it to Layla with a radiant smile. The two girls looked at each other for a moment, communicating in the universal language of children, and then Layla accepted the flower with a small, shy smile. "Want to play with me?" Madison asked, taking Layla's hand with the naturalness of someone who makes friends instantly. Layla hesitated for a moment, looking at her father as if asking for permission. Rashid nodded encouragingly, and the two girls ran off through the gardens, their laughter mixing with the singing of the birds. I watched the two of them play, my heart warming at the sight of Madison finally having company her own age. But there was something about Layla that worried me, a shadow in her eyes that a child so young shouldn't carry. "She lost her mother a year ago," Rashid said softly, as if he had read my thoughts. "A car accident. Since then, she rarely smiles, rarely plays. The doctors say it's grief, that she needs time," but his voice broke slightly, and I realized that his pain was as deep as his daughter's. He was a powerful man, capable of moving mountains with his money and influence, but completely helpless in the face of his child's suffering. "I can try to help," I offered spontaneously. "If you'll allow me, of course. I know what it's like to lose someone important. Maybe I can help her process her feelings." Rashid looked at me with such intense gratitude that I felt my heart race. "Would you do that? Even after everything you've been through?" "Especially because of everything I've been through," I replied. "No one should carry pain alone, much less a child." From that day on, Layla began to spend more time with us. Initially, she was reserved, watching our interactions with caution, as if she were waiting for us to do something that would confirm her worst expectations about the world. But Madison, with her contagious energy and pure innocence, slowly began to break down the barriers the girl had built around her wounded heart. I became a silent confidant for Layla. During our walks through the gardens, she began to talk about her mother, about how much she missed her, about the nightmares that tormented her every night. I listened to every word with attention, offering comfort when needed, but mostly just being a constant and understanding presence. One afternoon, while the girls were napping after lunch, Rashid found me in the palace library. It was an immense space, with shelves that stretched from the floor to the ceiling, full of books in various languages. I was flipping through a volume of Arab poetry when he entered. "You have transformed my daughter's life," he said, sitting in the armchair next to mine. "She smiles now. She laughs." I had forgotten what it was like to hear her laugh. "She just needed someone who understood her pain," I replied, closing the book. "Children are more resilient than we imagine, but also more sensitive. And you? How are you dealing with your own pain?" The question caught me by surprise. It had been so long since anyone had cared about my feelings that I had almost forgotten what it was like to have someone genuinely interested in my well-being. "I'm getting better," I replied honestly. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe without fear, that I can sleep without nightmares, that I can look to the future without terror." "Annie," he said softly, leaning slightly towards me, "I want you to know that there's no pressure at all, no expectations. You and Madison are free to stay as long as you want, to leave whenever you want. But I really hope you choose to stay." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability that contrasted with his position of power, that made my heart race. For a moment, our eyes met, and I felt as if time had stopped. There was a connection there, something deep and inexplicable that went far beyond gratitude or the circumstances that had brought us together. But before I could better analyze these confusing feelings, one of the palace guards appeared at the library door, his expression tense and worried. "Sir Rashid," he said respectfully, but with urgency, "there's a man at the gates. He says he has come to get his wife and daughter." My blood froze in my veins. Hank. Somehow he had found us. Rashid stood up immediately, his posture changing from relaxed to alert in a matter of seconds. "Double the security," he ordered the guard. "No one gets in or out without my authorization. And keep that man outside the gates." When we were alone again, he turned to me with a determined expression. "Don't worry, he can't touch you here. You're under my protection now." But I was terrified. I knew Hank better than anyone, knew what he was capable of when he wanted something. He wouldn't give up easily, wouldn't take no for an answer. What if he found a way to get in? What if he hurt someone in the palace because of us? "Maybe it's better if I go with him," I whispered, my voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "I don't want anyone to get hurt because of us." "Never," Rashid said with a firmness that surprised me. "You are not going back to that man. Not you and not Madison. I won't allow it." His words were like a balm to my wounded soul. For the first time in my life, there was someone willing to fight for me, to protect me not because he owned me, but simply because I deserved protection. That night, Hank tried several tactics to get us back. First, he sent messengers with offers of money for Rashid, as if I were a commodity that could be bought back. When that failed, he tried emotional appeals, claiming he was my rightful husband and had a legal right to me and my daughter. Finally, he resorted to threats, promising to cause trouble for Rashid if he didn't return his property. Rashid dealt with each attempt with impressive calm, rejecting all proposals without hesitation. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry in his eyes. He was genuinely concerned about our safety, and that touched me more deeply than any grand gesture could have. Over the next few days, the palace's security was reinforced. Guards patrolled the gardens constantly, and no one could enter or leave without strict identification. It was scary to know that Hank was nearby, but also comforting to feel the level of protection Rashid had provided for us. It was during this tense time that my relationship with Rashid began to change. We spent more time together, discussing security measures, but also simply talking about our lives, our fears, our dreams. I discovered that behind the facade of wealth and power was a kind and thoughtful man, marked by his own losses and struggling to raise his daughter in the best possible way. He told me about his wife, Aisha, how they met when they were young, how she had brought light and joy into his life. Her death had left an immense void not only in his life, but in Layla's life as well. He had dedicated himself completely to business since then, trying to keep himself too busy to think about the pain, but he recognized that this had created a distance between him and his daughter. "You changed that," he said one night, when we were sitting on the balcony watching the stars. "Layla is smiling again because of you. She's a child again because of you. And you?" I asked audaciously.
Since you've been here with me all this time, it means you enjoy our story. So, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. Give this one a like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from.
"Are you also smiling again?" He looked at me for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the light of the stars. "Yes," he finally said. "I am too." It was a simple admission, but loaded with meaning. I felt my heart race and a strange, wonderful sensation spread through my chest. It was something I hadn't felt in so long that I had almost forgotten its name: hope. But our bubble of peace and growing happiness was about to be tested in a way none of us had anticipated. A week later, in the dead of night, I was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. Madison was sleeping soundly beside me, but some primitive instinct alerted me that something was terribly wrong. I got up silently and walked to the window, peeking through the curtains. What I saw made my blood run cold. Several dark figures were moving through the gardens, skillfully avoiding the patrolling guards. They were professionals, that was clear from the way they moved, from the coordination of their actions, and I was absolutely certain who had sent them. Without wasting time, I picked Madison up and ran to Layla's room. The girl was sleeping peacefully, but I woke her gently, putting a finger to my lips to indicate that she needed to be silent. "What's happening?" Layla whispered, her big eyes wide with fear. "Just a little problem," I lied, trying to keep my voice calm. "We need to go to your dad's room now." Very, very slowly, carrying Madison and guiding Layla by the hand, we managed to get to the main room of the palace without being detected. Rashid was awake, already dressed and talking quietly on a phone. When he saw us, his eyes filled with relief. "Good, you brought them," he said, ending the call. "Security is dealing with the situation, but it's better if we stay together until everything is resolved." The next few hours were the longest of my life. We stayed locked in the room, listening to muffled sounds of fighting coming from the gardens. Rashid had positioned additional guards outside the door, but I still trembled with fear at the thought of what could happen if the invaders managed to reach us. Layla and Madison had fallen back asleep, nestled together on the room's sofa, seemingly oblivious to the danger surrounding us. I envied their ability to find peace even in the midst of chaos. "It's going to be okay," Rashid said softly, sitting next to me. "My security is very well trained. They won't be able to get in. It's because of us," I whispered, feeling guilty for having brought this violence into his peaceful home. "If we weren't here, none of this would be happening. If you weren't here, I would still be a dead man inside," he replied, taking my hand in his. "You brought life back to this house, Annie. Life back to me." The touch of his hands was warm and comforting, and for the first time since the trouble started, I felt that maybe everything really would be okay. There was a strength in him, a determination that made me believe he would be able to protect us from any threat. When the sun finally rose, the battle was over. 3 of the invaders were captured by the guards, and the others fled into the desert. More importantly, no one in the palace had been seriously hurt, just a few minor cuts and bruises. Rashid went out to supervise the cleanup and talk to the authorities, leaving us under extra protection. When he returned a few hours later, there was a different expression on his face, a mixture of anger and determination that I had never seen before. "Did you talk to the men who were captured?" I asked. "Yes," he replied, his voice cutting. "They confirmed that they were sent by your ex-husband. He's not going to give up, Annie. He's going to keep trying until he gets what he wants or what?" I asked, even though I was afraid of the answer. "Or until he's stopped for good." There was something in his tone that made me realize Rashid was planning something more than simply improving our security. There was a cold determination in his eyes that reminded me that, despite all his kindness towards me, he was a powerful and influential man, accustomed to solving problems definitively. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Whatever it takes to protect my family," he replied, and the word family hit me like a bolt of lightning. Family. That's how he saw us now. Not as temporary guests or those he protected, but as part of his family. The thought filled me with a joy I didn't know was possible to feel, but it also filled me with fear. If we were his family, that meant he would be willing to go to great lengths to protect us. And I knew from my own experience that men with power and resources could be very dangerous when their families were threatened. That afternoon, after the children had been put down for a nap, Rashid found me again in the library. This time, however, he didn't come for a casual conversation. There was a seriousness in his posture that immediately put me on alert. "Annie," he said, sitting in front of me, "I need to tell you something. About that night 3 years ago, about how you saved Layla." I frowned, confused. "I thought you had already told me everything." "Not everything," he admitted, running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture. "The truth is, I was at the market that day. I saw when you ran into the burning building to save my daughter. This surprised me." "You were there? Why didn't you say anything at the time?" "Because when I ran out after the two of you, you had already disappeared into the crowd. I tried to find you for months after that. I hired private investigators, offered rewards, did everything. But you had simply vanished." I remembered that chaotic day. After saving the girl, I had handed her over to some people who seemed to know her and then ran off to look for Madison. In the middle of all that confusion, I hadn't even thought about staying to be thanked or recognized. I was only able to find you because, he hesitated, as if he was struggling with the words. "Because I keep informants all over the region, people who report anything unusual or interesting to me. When I found out that a young woman with a small daughter was being offered for sale, I sent someone to investigate. When I found out it was you, the realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. You already knew who I was before you arrived that day." "The whole show of surprise, of recognition, was real," he said quickly. "My surprise was real. I expected to find you eventually, but I never thought it would be that way, under those circumstances. When I saw you there, so vulnerable, with your daughter in your arms, I felt like my heart was going to explode." I stood up abruptly, walking to the window to process what I had just heard. Part of me felt manipulated, as if our whole story was based on a lie. But another part of me recognized the sincerity in his voice, the genuine emotion in his eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, still with my back to him. "Because I can no longer live with this lie between us. And because what I feel for you goes far beyond gratitude." Those words made me turn slowly to face him. He had also stood up and was standing in the middle of the library, vulnerable and exposed in a way that contrasted completely with his usual power. "What are you saying?" I whispered. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Annie. For your strength, for your kindness, for the way you take care of the children, for the way you brought light back into this dark house." He took a step towards me. "I'm saying that I don't want you to stay here just for safety. I want you to stay because you choose to stay. Because you feel for me even a fraction of what I feel for you." My heart was beating so fast that I was sure he could hear it. For weeks, I had been denying my own feelings, convincing myself that any attraction I felt for Rashid was just gratitude or a natural reaction to kindness after so much abuse. But the truth was that I had also fallen in love with him. "Rashid," I began, my voice trembling. "I know it's a lot to process," he said quickly. "I know you've been through terrible traumas, that you might need time. I'm not asking for an answer now. I just wanted you to know the truth about my feelings." I walked slowly towards him, my heart in my throat. When I was very close, I raised my hand and gently touched his face. He closed his eyes at my touch as if savoring the sensation. "The truth," I said softly, "is that I have also fallen in love with you." I tried to deny it. I tried to convince myself that it was just circumstances, but I can no longer pretend that I don't feel it. His eyes opened, shining with such intense joy that it made me smile despite all the tears rolling down my face. "Annie," he whispered, leaning slowly towards me. "But," I said, placing a finger gently over his lips, "there's something you need to understand. If we're going to move forward with this, it has to be as equals. Not as the man who saved me and the woman who owes gratitude. As partners who choose to be together." A slow smile spread across his face. "It couldn't be any other way." And then, finally, our lips met in a kiss that was both gentle and passionate, full of promises for the future and healing for the past. It was a kiss that sealed not only our love, but also our decision to build something new together, something based on mutual respect and free choice. When we separated, we remained embraced for a long moment, simply enjoying the feeling of being complete for the first time in our lives. Outside, I could hear the sound of the children playing in the gardens, their laughter echoing through the palace walls like celestial music. "The girls are going to be happy," Rashid said softly. "They are already a family," I replied, smiling. "We were just late to realize it, but our newfound happiness would be tested once more before we could truly begin our new life together." 2 days later, one of the guards brought us news that would change everything for good. "Sir," he said, bowing respectfully, "the authorities have arrested Hank ibn Rashad. He was caught trying to recruit more men for another attack on the palace. He is being charged with home invasion, attempted kidnapping, and human trafficking." I felt my knees buckle at the news. It was over. Finally, truly over. Hank could no longer threaten us, could no longer turn our lives into an endless nightmare. "There's more," the guard continued. "During the investigation, they discovered evidence that he was involved in a larger human trafficking network. It seems you and your daughter weren't the first women he had sold." The revelation made me nauseous, but also relieved. How many other women had been saved by his arrest? How many families would not be destroyed because he had finally been stopped? Rashid hugged me tightly when he saw my reaction. "It's over," he whispered in my ear. "He can't hurt you anymore. Never again." That night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply without nightmares. Madison was safe in my arms, and through the open window I could see the palace lights illuminating the peaceful gardens. It was a vision of safety and beauty that a few months ago I would never have imagined would be part of my life. The next morning, Rashid found me in the garden where I was watching Madison and Layla playing together. The two had become inseparable, true sisters in everything but blood. Seeing their innocent and pure friendship was one of the simplest and deepest pleasures of my new life. "Now that Hank has been arrested," he said, sitting next to me on the marble bench, "you and Madison are truly free. You can go anywhere, do anything." There was a tension in his voice that he couldn't completely hide. I realized that, despite all our declarations of love, he still feared that I might choose to leave now that there was nothing forcing me to stay. "Do you want us to leave?" I asked, turning to face him. "I want you to do what makes you happy," he replied, but his eyes told a different story. I smiled, taking his hand in mine. "Then we'll stay. Not because we have to, not because it's convenient, but because we choose to. Because this is where we belong now." The relief that spread across his face was so intense that it made me laugh. "Are you sure? You don't feel pressured by Rashid?" I interrupted gently. "For the first time in my life, I'm making a truly free choice. And I choose you. I choose this life. I choose this family that we built together." He pulled me into his arms, kissing me with a passion that spoke of relief, joy, and future promises. When we separated, the children were watching with mischievous smiles. "Are you guys getting married?" Layla asked with the typical curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Yes," Rashid replied, looking at me. "If any agrees." I looked at Madison, who was smiling radiantly, then at Layla, who looked happier than I had seen her since we arrived, and finally at Rashid, the man who had bought my freedom and then gave me something even more precious, the chance to choose my own destiny. "Yes," I said, my voice firm and full of certainty. "I agree." And so, in the fragrant garden of that palace that had become our home, we sealed our commitment not only to each other, but to the family we had created from the ashes of our past sorrows. It was a new beginning for all of us, built on a solid foundation of genuine love, mutual respect, and the courage to believe that sometimes fairy tales can come true. The following weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations and adaptation to our new reality as a united family. Rashid insisted that the ceremony be exactly as I wanted, without any pressure or expectations. We chose something simple and intimate, just the four of us and a few close palace staff who had become like family to us. On the wedding day, when I looked at myself in the mirror wearing a simple but elegant dress that Fatima had specially ordered for me, I barely recognized the woman who was staring back at me. There was no more fear in my eyes, no more marks of suffering on my face. There was only joy, hope, and the serene confidence of someone who had finally found her place in the world. Madison was radiant in her little floral dress, and Layla, our small maid of honor, looked more alive and happy than at any time since I met her. Seeing the two girls together, knowing that they would grow up as sisters in a home full of love and security, filled my heart with an indescribable joy. The ceremony was held in the garden, under the same jasmine where we had shared our first kiss. When Rashid and I exchanged vows, promising not only to love and protect each other, but also to honor the free choice that had united us, I felt as if I was definitively leaving behind the scared, broken woman I had been and fully embracing the strong, loved woman I had become. With this ring, Rashid said, sliding a simple but beautiful band onto my finger, I promise that our union will always be based on choice, never on obligation, on equality, never on possession, on love, always on love. When it was my turn, I looked directly into his dark eyes and said, with this ring, I promise that I will always remember that you bought my freedom, but it was my heart that chose to stay. I promise to build a family with you based on trust, respect, and the courage to always choose love. Our kiss as husband and wife was sweet and full of promises, watched by the two little ones who were already the center of our united world. When we separated, they ran to us, and we all found ourselves embracing in a perfect circle of family love. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Rashid and I walked through the moonlit gardens, hand in hand, planning our future together. We talked about dreams we could now pursue, about trips we could take as a family, about the charity foundation we wanted to establish to help other women in situations similar to the one I had faced. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, I confessed, stopping next to the central fountain where the water danced under the starlight. It is real, he said, pulling me into his arms, and it's ours, built with free choices and true love. I looked at the palace that was now truly our home, its windows glowing warmly in the night, knowing that inside it slept two girls who were now my daughters in every sense that mattered. It was a life I had never dared to dream of, born from the most improbable of circumstances. Thank you, I whispered against his chest. For what? He asked, kissing the top of my head. For teaching me that freedom isn't just about being free from something, but about having the freedom to choose where to go from where you are. Years later, when Madison and Layla were already teenagers and our family had grown with two more children, I often returned to that garden where it had all started for us. I watched our children playing in the same flower beds where their older sisters had met, and reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us there. The foundation we established had helped hundreds of women escape abusive situations and rebuild their lives. Madison, now a confident and compassionate young woman, often helped with the foundation's programs for children. Layla had grown up to become a fierce advocate for women's rights, her own experience of loss transformed into a force to help others. Rashid and I built a partnership that went far beyond romance, working together not only as husband and wife, but as true companions in all aspects of our lives. He never tried to protect me in a paternalistic way or treat me as something fragile that needed to be guarded. Instead, he supported my strength, celebrated my independence, and worked by my side to build something greater than either of us could have achieved alone. On a particularly quiet afternoon, when I was sitting on the same marble bench where we had shared so many important conversations, Madison, now 17, came and sat next to me. Mom, she said, using the word that had become as natural as breathing, sometimes I wonder what our life would be like if you hadn't tried to run away that night. It was a question I had asked myself many times over the years. We would probably still be trapped, I replied honestly. Trapped not only physically, but emotionally, trapped by not believing we deserve something better. Aren't you afraid that people will think our story is too much of a fantasy? A rich man who shows up to save a woman in distress? I smiled, understanding her concern. It was a question that I myself had struggled to answer over the years, especially when we started working publicly with the foundation and our story became known. What makes our story real, I finally said, is not the fact that your dad is rich or powerful. It's the fact that we both made choices. I chose to save a child in danger years ago, without expecting anything in return. He chose to honor that kindness when he had the opportunity. And then, when we were reintroduced under terrible circumstances, we both chose to see beyond appearances and build something based on mutual respect. Madison nodded thoughtfully. And you chose to stay, even when he said you were free to leave. That was the most important choice of all, I confirmed. Because it was made not out of fear or need, but out of love and hope. At that moment, Rashid appeared in the garden, now with a few gray hairs at his temples that only added to his natural distinction. Layla was by his side, carrying our youngest daughter, Amira, who was 3 and had inherited her mother's dark curls and her father's expressive eyes. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" Rashid asked, kissing my forehead before sitting on the other side of Madison. "About choices," Madison replied. "About how we got here." Layla, now a young woman of 20, smiled. "I remember the day you arrived. I was so lost, so sad. I could barely remember what it was like to smile. And now you work helping other children who have gone through losses," Rashid said with evident pride in his voice. "I learned from the best teacher," Layla replied, looking at me with an affection that still moved me after all these years. "And he taught me that pain can be transformed into purpose, that healing can come through helping others heal too." Little Amira stirred in Layla's arms, opening her sleepy eyes. "Mama," she murmured, holding her little arms out to me. As I picked her up, feeling her familiar and comforting weight, I reflected on how our family had grown and evolved. It wasn't just the number of people that had increased, but the depth of our bonds, the strength of our mutual commitment. "Do you know what I've learned over all these years?" I said, looking at each of the dear faces around me. "That true freedom isn't just about escaping something bad. It's about having the courage to choose something good, even when you're not sure if you deserve it." Rashid took my free hand, intertwining our fingers as he had done thousands of times before. "And that true love isn't about possession or control. It's about giving the person you love space to be who she really is, and choosing to stay by her side not out of obligation, but out of the genuine joy of sharing life." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that were reflected in the waters of the fountains. It was my favorite time of day, when the whole family gathered for dinner and we shared the stories of our days. "Come on," I said, getting up with Amira still in my arms. "Fatima is waiting to serve dinner, and you know how she gets when we're late." As we walked back to the palace, our shadows lengthening behind us over the polished stone paths, I felt a deep and comprehensive gratitude filling my chest. It wasn't just gratitude for the obvious blessings, the magnificent home, the financial security, the love of a wonderful family. It was gratitude for the journey that had brought us there, including the painful parts that had been necessary for us to truly appreciate the light. During dinner, as I watched our 4 children talking and laughing around the table, exchanging stories of their days at school and making plans for the weekend, I was struck by the precious normality of it all. This was our life now, not a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but an everyday reality built on conscious choices and persistent love. After the children had gone to bed, Rashid and I took our traditional nightly walk through the gardens. It was a ritual that had developed naturally over the years, our time to talk about anything that was on our minds, to plan for the future, or simply to enjoy each other's company in comfortable silence. "The foundation board approved our proposal to expand to 3 more countries," he said, sharing the good news he had received that day. "That's wonderful," I replied, feeling a familiar emotion of joy at the thought of how many more women we could help. "Madison will be excited to hear. She was so worried about the statistics she saw about the situation in Sudan." "Our daughter has a big heart," Rashid said proudly. "All of them do. You raised them well." "We raised them well," I corrected gently. It was important to me that he recognized his own role in shaping the extraordinary people our daughters were becoming. We stopped at the place where we had gotten married, now marked by a small pergola that Rashid had built for our 5th anniversary. Scented ivy grew all over its structure, creating a natural arch of greenery and flowers. "Sometimes I still wake up and think this was all a dream," I confessed, leaning against his chest. "What if it was?" he asked, his arms closing around me. "What if you woke up tomorrow and discovered you were still in that shed, waiting to be sold?" It was a question he asked me occasionally, and I knew it came from his own residual insecurity, his fear that one day I might regret the choice I had made. "Then I would know that dreams like this are possible," I replied, as I always did, "and I would do everything in my power to make them a reality again." He kissed the top of my head, a gesture as familiar and comforting as the beating of my own heart. "I love you, Annie. Not just for what you did for my daughter, not just for bringing joy back into our life. I love you for who you are, for the strength you show every day, for the kindness you spread wherever you go. And I love you for showing me that it's possible to be protected without being possessed, to be loved without being controlled," I replied. "For giving me the freedom to choose you every day." We stood embraced under the stars, two adults who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful and lasting from that union. It wasn't a fairy tale love, it was something better. It was a real love, tested by time and adversity, based on conscious choice and renewed daily through actions and words. When we finally went back inside, we found Layla in the living room, working on her laptop. She was finishing her master's thesis in psychology, focusing on therapy for children who had lost parents. Still awake? I asked, sitting next to her on the sofa. I want to finish this chapter, she replied, but closed the laptop and turned to give me her full attention. Can I ask you a personal question? Of course, I said, curious about what was on her mind. Do you ever regret not having met Dad under different circumstances? That our family story started with so much pain? It was a deep and thoughtful question, typical of Layla, who had always been the most philosophical of our daughters. I thought carefully before answering. No, I finally said, because the pain we experienced before we met is part of what made us able to recognize and value the love we built together. If we had met under ordinary circumstances, we might not have developed the same depth of gratitude and commitment. Layla nodded thoughtfully. For my research, I've talked to many children who have gone through trauma. What impresses me most is how some are able to transform their pain into strength, while others get stuck in the cycle of suffering. What's the difference? Rashid asked, who had joined us.
If this story kept you hooked until now, just imagine the next ones. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any. Give this one a like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from right now.
The presence of at least one person who believes in them and offers them unconditional love, Layla replied. Someone who sees them not as victims defined by their trauma, but as survivors capable of growth and healing. I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I realized how our own family experience had informed Layla's career choice and her understanding of human nature. You're going to help a lot of children, I said softly. I hope to help in the same way you helped me, she replied. By showing that it's possible to build a beautiful life even after the worst experiences. Later that night, when Rashid and I were lying in our bed, talking quietly so as not to wake Amira, who was sleeping in her crib nearby, I reflected on the conversation with Layla. We are raising strong women, I said to Rashid. We are raising people who know they always have choices, he corrected. Even when the options seem limited, there is always a choice about how to respond, how to grow, how to love. It was a lesson I had learned the hard way myself, but that I could now pass on to our daughters in a much gentler way. Rashid, I whispered in the darkness, thank you for buying my freedom. Thank you for choosing to stay, he replied, his voice full of emotion even after so many years. And at that moment, surrounded by the soft sounds of our family sleeping around us, Amira's regular breathing, Madison's distant footsteps walking down the hall, the almost inaudible sound of Layla closing her books downstairs, I felt a deep and complete peace. Our story had begun with fear, hopelessness, and circumstances that no one would voluntarily choose. But it had turned into something beautiful through the power of conscious choice, persistent love, and the courage to believe that everyone deserves freedom and happiness. I closed my eyes, knowing that when the sun rose the next day, I would choose again. I would choose love. I would choose my family. I would choose to continue building a life based on the freedom that had been bought with money but sustained with choices of the heart. And so, under the same roof where I had once arrived as a desperate refugee, I fell asleep as a free, loved, and complete woman, surrounded by the family I had chosen and who had chosen me in return, day after day, year after year, in a continuous demonstration that the most beautiful endings are those that are actually just new beginnings in disguise.